Hello and welcome back to another session on criticism and theory. We will continue with the lyrical ballads. As I told you, they classified good and bad poetry. Now, see, they based this classification from the great Roman orator Cicero, who had divided this style into three categories. I told you they followed the classicists, the Greco-Roman period, okay, and they followed the great Roman orator Cicero, and that was divided. And Cicero had divided style into three categories: the low, which is used to prove a point; the middle, which is used to please for pleasure; and the high or the lofty. Lofty means very high, sublime kind of thing, okay, the lofty ideas, very high ideas, great. High and lofty, which is used to move the readers, make them think, all right. So the categorization was originally applied to oratory. Cicero had applied this to oratory, but it proved to be useful in poetry as well. And this based on this, they used to distinguish different kinds of poetry according to their style. So you have the elegies. They are considered as the low style, which is used to prove something, and the pastoral used the middle style, and the epic style was considered as very high or very lofty. The epics, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and all, they are epics. They were considered high or the lofty type. So we have in our during the 18th century writers, that is the neoclassicists, what did they do? They took this form, this classification given by the Greco-Roman classicists, or given by the great orator Cicero, which was used by the Greco-Roman writers to distinguish different types of poetry. They took this, and what did they do? Instead of three categories, they reduced these three categories into two. They had only two categories. Who? The neoclassicists. For them, it was all to do with the low and the high, no middle. Okay, so the low and the lofty, the low poetry, or the low style, or the lofty or the high style. Okay, so that was one important thing that you have to remember. Another feature, this neoclassical writers of the 18th century, like Pope, Dryden, Dr. Samuel Johnson and all, they rejected the low words. Low words means common words. You don't have to worry, you won't have to write all these for your examination part. Only if you just have to listen and understand, so that you will be it will be easier for you to understand why Shakespeare has written, Wordsworth has written preface, okay, to the lyrical ballads. So these neoclassical writers of the 18th century, like Pope, Dryden and Dr. Samuel Johnson, all of them rejected low words. Low words means ordinary words, common phrases that is used by common people. They considered it unfit for poetic use. Okay, that's very, very important. They considered this common language or common words unfit for poetic use. They felt that these words, which became, or which is an everyday usage, became too familiar to the ear, and therefore they lost all their power to impress. The same thing that we learned in defamiliarization technique. What did Victor Slowacki say? Victor Slowacki used defamiliarization, Ostromini, to defamiliarize the familiar words, right? Because they became so familiar to the ear that they have lost all their powers to impress. The same thing they also did, the Augustan period, the Augustan writers. They felt that these words, that is, if we use everyday or common words, they are too familiar, and therefore they will lose all the power. Those words will not have the power to impress, and therefore they gave away, they rejected low words. Low words means common words. Common words which are understood by the common people, the colloquial words, the common words, the ordinary language of ordinary man. Instead, they used very huge or very, very difficult words. They used not extravagance. Again, they were revolting against extravagance, but that again, extravagance, you must remember, extravagance against emotion. Too much of emotion, too wordy and too much of emotion, filled with a lot of emotion. They used shorter words, but they were all punch words, like only an intelligent person can understand. It was all to do with the intellect. The literate person can understand. Not meant for the ordinary common man. Okay? And also, they also rejected technical words, like for instance, you have studied that in language and linguistics. I'm just giving an example, it's not that. Like you have the words like register, right? Words, certain phrases used by lawyers, certain phrases used by doctors, engineers and all, which are not known to us, to the common man. So they said even such words are too intelligible to others, because only the professions, the people of that profession concerned can understand. So these words were also considered unfit. So low words and such words like technical words were also considered unfit for poetry. Okay. Now, the neoclassicist, a poetic diction, according to them, is where words used are not common everyday words or technical words. Okay, and poetic diction also differs, according to them, it differs from prose. Wordsworth is going to tell them that there is no difference between prose and poetry, whereas the neoclassicists are, or according to neoclassicists, there is a difference between prose and poetry. According to them, poetic diction, the vocabulary, the words, the rhythm, etc., the words used in poetry is different from that of prose. Okay? It differs from prose by its happy combination of words or flowers of speech. I mean flowers of speech. Okay? And the flowers of speech which are plucked from the bramble of current forms of expression. All right. So, and used in such a way as to ornate them, and also used in such a way that it is not of low style. No ordinary words are used. They use they use a different way to defamiliarize the familiar setting. Okay, and they also warned. There was a warning also. They warned the writers or the poets that these words must be employed judiciously. Remember, the earlier Elizabethan poets, they used it extravagantly, whereas they said that if it should be employed judiciously, and if it is employed judiciously by gifted writers, then that would serve the purpose of good poetry. Employed judiciously meaning avoid extravagance. But if it falls in the hands of mere bad writers, versifiers, that is the writers who are not considered good writers, okay, if it falls in the hands of mere common poets or the versifiers, it soon degenerates. Degenerates into what? Degenerates into mere artifice. Okay, and it becomes just a flowery language which exaggerates a lot. That's all. So these people, the neoclassical writers, they said that the poetic diction is different from that of prose. Okay, and how is it different from that of prose? It is a happy combination of beautiful words employed judiciously, and if it is in the hands of a gifted writer, then it serves the purpose of good poetry. But if it falls in the hands of a bad writer, it becomes a mere extravagant, flowery language. So that is also being spoken of. So these are the most important features of neoclassical writers or the neoclassical period. Again, as I told you, in the Elizabethan period, there was a decline, right? Likewise, here also we see a decline. Thus, like in all eras, like in all the periods, the neoclassical poetry also became too rule oriented. They were like going by the rule book. They were more interested, or they gave prime importance to form and intellectual poetry. So it was also, remember, another thing that you have to remember is it was based on this period itself was an age of prose, not poetry. Okay, it was an age of prose. So they gave prime importance to form of writing, how to write. Thus their poetry was decorated and figurative. Eventually what happened was they gave warning and all, but only very few people or very few writers like Dryden, like Alexander Pope, or like Dr. Samuel Johnson were able to give justice to it. Though Johnson, Dryden, Pope all spoke about good and bad poetry, they were against extravagance. Okay, but again they also used flowery language to deal with the aristocratic way of life. They used poetry to bring the political, social life of the period. They used only language that was spoken by the intellects. Poetry and prose thus became the vehicle of thought, which was confined only to a set of people who were intelligent, who were literate and aristocratic. Books were expensive. It was not like today. It was very expensive. Only very few people could afford it. Common man and his language was not a part of this poetry. Nature was given importance, but it was not the nature about natural beauty or imagination, but it was the nature of human beings, the representation of everyday life, not the nature as of the Romantics or the Elizabethan period. To them, language of poetry is again different from language of prose. But before Dr. Johnson's death itself, there appeared a change in this literary characteristics. So we can say Dryden, the peak, it starts slowly. It starts with Dryden. It reaches the peak with Alexander Pope, and then slowly it starts to decline. Of course, Samuel Johnson was a very important writer, a great writer, but it started to decline. And before Johnson's death itself, there appeared a small change in this literary characteristics. Slowly you can see the Romantic school of poetry appearing. The poets who stand as a bridge between the two schools of poetry, that is the neoclassical period or the neoclassical poetry and the Romantic poetry, can be called as what? The transition poets. You have James Thomson, Thomas Gray, William Collins, Oliver Goldsmith, William Cowper, etc. To them, or in them, we see the features of the Romantic school as well as the Augustan poets. To be precise, you have the content of the Romantics, like return to nature, concern for life of the poor, the commoners, the revival of old literature, and from the Augustan poetry, they took the form of writing, like you have the heroic couplet, the heroic stanza and all. They took the form. So it is like a period sandwiched between two periods, that is the neoclassical period and the romantic period, that is the transition period. I hope you understood this. I hope this video was useful to you, because if you understand this period, you will find it easy, or you will find it will be more easier for you to understand as to why Wordsworth wrote the Lyrical Ballads, and later he wrote the preface to the Lyrical Ballads. We are dealing with the preface to the Lyrical Ballads. Okay, Lyrical Ballads is a collection of poems written by Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge. Okay, and it created a sensation. And in fact, Wordsworth was not a poet. Wordsworth was not a critic. He was not a critic by temperament or by learning. He was forced into criticism, or he was forced to take the role of a critic, adorn the role of a critic. So you will find a lot of disparities in his philosophy also, because he was not a critic. Okay, it's like he gives the സെൽഫ് ഗോൾ അടിക്കുക എന്നൊക്കെ പറയില്ലേ, അതേപോലെ തന്നെ അദ്ദേഹം പറഞ്ഞു വന്നിട്ട് അവസാനം വന്നിട്ട് ഈ നിയോ ക്ലാസിക്കൽ റൈറ്റേഴ്സ് എന്താണോ പറഞ്ഞത് അത് പറഞ്ഞ് ലാസ്റ്റ് ആ ഒരു പോയിന്റിലേക്കാണ് ആൾ തിരിച്ചു വരുന്നത്. ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ബിക്കോസ് ഹി വാസ് നോട്ട് എ ക്രിട്ടിക്. ഓക്കെ, ബട്ട് ദർ ഈസ് എ ലോട്ട് ഓഫ് തിങ്സ് ദാറ്റ് ഹി സ്പോക്ക്. ദിസ് കംസ് വിത്ത് പോയറ്റിക് ഡിക്ഷനിലാണ് ഈ ഒരു ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരു സെൽഫ് ഗോൾ അടിക്കുന്ന ഒരു സംഭവം വരുന്നത്. അല്ലാതെ ബാക്കിയുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളിൽ ഒരു റിവോൾട്ട് തന്നെയായിരുന്നു, ഒരു വ്യത്യാസം തന്നെ ക്രിയേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റി വേർഡ്സ്വർത്തിന്. സോ ദ പർപ്പസ് ഓഫ് ലിറിക്കൽ ബാലഡ്സ്, ഈ ലിറിക്കൽ ബാലഡ്സ് വിച്ച് വാസ് പബ്ലിഷ്ഡ് ഇൻ 1798, 1798 പബ്ലിഷ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള ഈ ലിറിക്കൽ ബാലഡ്സ് ഒരു സെറ്റ് ഓഫ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു കളക്ഷൻ ഓഫ് പോയംസ് ആയിരുന്നു. അതിൻ്റെ പ്രെഫസ് ആണ് നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ പഠിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നത്. The preface to the Lyrical Ballads was written in 1800. Okay, അതാണ് നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ പഠിക്കുന്നത്. എസ്സേ പഠിക്കുന്നത് 1800 എഴുതിയ preface to the Lyrical Ballads ആണ്. പക്ഷേ ഇതിന് മുന്നേ, അതായത് 1798 പബ്ലിഷ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള Lyrical Ballads was a collection of poems written in collaboration with S.T. Coleridge. അപ്പോൾ ഈ പോയത്തിൻ്റെ പേർപ്പസ്, ഈ സെറ്റ് ഓഫ് പോയംസ് എഴുതിയതിൻ്റെ പേർപ്പസ് എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ, ഇറ്റ് വാസ് എ കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് എ റിവോൾട്ട്, ഒരു തരം റിവോൾട്ടായിരുന്നു. അതായത് ഈ നിയോ ക്ലാസിക്കൽ പോയറ്റ്സിന് എഗെയിൻസ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട്. ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് എലിസബത്തൻ പോയട്രി ഡീജനറേറ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളതും, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഏതൊരു ഇറയ്ക്കും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഏതൊരു പീരീഡിനും അതിൻ്റെ കയറ്റവും ഇറക്കമുണ്ട് അല്ലേ. അപ്പോൾ ഇതിൽ എലിസബത്തൻ പോയട്രി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് അവസാനം ആയപ്പോഴത്തേക്കും എക്സ്ട്രാവഗൻസും ആവശ്യമില്ലാത്ത ഒരുപാട് ഇമോഷൻസായി. അൺവാണ്ടഡ് ഇമോഷൻസ്, എക്സ്ട്രാവഗൻസ്, ലോട്ട്സ് ഓഫ് ഭയങ്കര വേർഡി ആയിട്ടുള്ളതും, അതിനകത്ത് കണ്ടൻറ്റിനെക്കാട്ടിലും കൂടുതൽ ഒരുപാട് ആർക്കേക്ക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ടേംസ്, ഓൾഡ് ടേംസ്. ആൻഡ് നോട്ട് ജസ്റ്റ് ദാറ്റ്, ക്ലാസിസിസത്തിൻ്റെ റിവൈവൽ തന്നെയാണ് റിനൈസൻസ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. ക്ലാസിസിസത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു റിന്യൂവൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ റിവൈവൽ തന്നെയാണ്. പക്ഷേ അതിൽ ഒരുപാട് ലാസ്റ്റ് ആയപ്പോഴത്തേക്കും എലിസബത്തൻ പോയട്രിയുടെ ഏറ്റവും അവസാനത്തെ ഒരു ഘട്ടം ആയപ്പോഴത്തേക്കും ഇറ്റ് ബിക്കെയിം a kind of, in the hands of bad poets, it turned out to be, it degenerated. ഇതേ പ്രശ്നം തന്നെയാണ് നിയോ ക്ലാസിക്കൽ പീരീഡിലും സംഭവിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത്. ഡ്രൈഡൻ്റെയും പോപ്പിൻ്റെയും ഡ്രൈഡൻ്റെയും അലക്സാണ്ടർ പോപ്പിൻ്റെയും അതേപോലെ തന്നെ സാമുവൽ ജോൺസൻ്റെയൊക്കെ കയ്യിൽ അത് വളരെ ഭംഗിയായിട്ട് തന്നെ ഹാൻഡിൽ ചെയ്യാൻ അവർക്ക് പറ്റി. പക്ഷേ പിന്നീടുള്ള ലേറ്റർ പോയിറ്റ്സ് ഇറ്റ് ബിക്കെയിം, ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞില്ലേ, പൊളിറ്റിക്സിനും സിവിക് ലൈഫിനും ഹ്യൂമൻ നേച്ചറിനും ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഇൻ്റലക്ച്വൽ ആയിട്ടുള്ള പോയംസ് ആയിരുന്നു. ഇറ്റ് വാസ് ഓൾ അബൌട്ട് ഹൗ ടു റൈറ്റ് പോയം റാദർ ദാൻ വാട്ട് ടു റൈറ്റ്. കണ്ടൻറ്റിനല്ല ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻസ് കൊടുത്തിരുന്നത്. ഇറ്റ് വാസ് followed the classicist. Classicistനെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഗ്രീക്കോ റോമൻ പീരീഡിലുള്ള ക്ലാസിക്കൽ റൈറ്റേഴ്സിനെ ഫോളോ ചെയ്തിരുന്നുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ അവരിൽ നിന്നും എന്താണ് എടുത്തു മാറ്റിയത്? ഇത് എന്താണ്, ഇമാജിനേഷനും വൈൽഡ് ഇമാജിനേഷനും അതേപോലെ തന്നെ ഈ സൂപ്പർ സെൻഷ്വസ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾക്കൊക്കെ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻസ് അവരെ തള്ളി. അതിന് പകരമായിട്ട് അവർ എഴുത്തില്ലേ, എഴുതുന്ന രീതി അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ റൂൾസ് ആൻഡ് റെഗുലേഷൻസില്ലേ, ഒരു ട്രാജഡി ആകുമ്പോൾ എങ്ങനെയായിരിക്കണം, ഒരു എലിജി എങ്ങനെയായിരിക്കണം എഴുതുന്നത്, അതിൻ്റെ റൂൾസ് ആൻഡ് റെഗുലേഷൻസിലെ മീറ്റർ എങ്ങനെയായിരിക്കണം, അതാണ് അവർ നിയോ ക്ലാസിസിസ്റ്റ് കൂടുതലും അതിനാണ് ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻസ് കൊടുത്തിട്ടുള്ളത്. സ്ട്രക്ചർ, ദ ഫോം ഓഫ് റൈറ്റിംഗ്. ഓക്കെ, അപ്പോൾ ലാസ്റ്റ് ആയപ്പോൾ അഗെയിൻ ദ പീരീഡ് ആദ്യം നല്ലതായിരുന്നു, പിന്നീടായപ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് അത് ഡീജനറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ തുടങ്ങി. അത് ഏതൊരു പീരീഡിൻ്റെ അവസ്ഥ അങ്ങനെ തന്നെയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ഈ വേർഡ്സ്വർത്ത് എഴുതുന്ന കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ ഈ ക്ലാസിസിസം ഫോളോ ചെയ്തിരുന്ന കുറച്ച് പേരുണ്ട്, എന്നാൽ ക്ലാസിസിസം ഇഷ്ടപ്പെടാത്ത കുറച്ച് പേരും ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അങ്ങനെയാണ് നമുക്ക് ഈ ട്രാൻസിഷൻ പോയിറ്റ്സ് വരുന്നത്. ഈ ട്രാൻസിഷൻ പോയറ്റ്സിൽ നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നത് ദേ സ്ലോലി ഡ്രിഫ്റ്റഡ് ഫ്രം ദി neoclassical style of writing. Certain attributes or certain features of the neoclassical writers or writings were just shunned, and they started to turn back to that old English poetry or Elizabethan poetryയിൽ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന ആ പഴയ സ്റ്റൈൽ ഓഫ് റൈറ്റിംഗ്, സ്പെൻസറിൻ്റെ ആയാലും ഷേക്സ്പിയറിൻ്റെ ആയാലും ആ പഴയ സ്റ്റൈൽ ഓഫ് റൈറ്റിംഗ്, they started to bring it back. And what was that important one that they brought back? That is turning towards nature. Nature as of not human nature, which was the most important content or the theme of the neoclassical writers. Here it was nature as such. Nature being the teacher of everything, of human life. The real nature as such. Okay, so they started slowly turning back to nature, and also they found solace in nature, and also they gave importance to subjective poetry. Okay, all right, so you find this transition there. Therefore you can call this transition period sandwiched between the neoclassical poetry and the romantic poetry, because they had the features of both these eras. They took from the neoclassical writers, or the neoclassical period, they took rules and regulations. ഈ transferred epithet നിങ്ങൾ പഠിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട് ഇല്ലേ? The transferred epithet, one example for transferred epithet would be the plowman plods his weary way. Gray, the elegy written in the country churchyardലുള്ളതാണ്. അപ്പോൾ വിയറി വേ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ട്രാൻസ്ഫേർഡ് എപ്പിത്തെറ്റാണ്. Another example would be polished cars. Polished traffic with a mind ahead. Remember roadside stand? അതിനകത്തും ട്രാൻസ്ഫേർഡ് എപ്പിത്തെറ്റ് ഉണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഈ ട്രാൻസ്ഫേർഡ് എപ്പിത്തെറ്റ് വാസ് വൺ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ് way or poetic style that was used by the neoclassical writers. In fact, the poetic diction, not the diction, the way of writing poetry, those the figurative, the figures of writing poetry, poetic figures, all were taken from the neoclassical writers. Okay, and romantic period ഇതെന്താ നേച്ചർ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ക്യാരക്ടറിസ്റ്റിക് അവരെടുത്തിട്ടുള്ളത് ടേണിങ് ടുവേർഡ്സ് നേച്ചർ, finding solace in nature, and also their theme was about the humble life of the rustic people, the village life. They started to go back to the village life, whereas neoclassical periods, they celebrated they celebrated city life, whereas the romantic period, they celebrated which one? The country life or the rustic life or the village life. So in the transition period, you can see this drift. This drift of going back to nature, celebrating the rustic life, celebrating the village life. Okay, so you see half of the people still believing and celebrating this neoclassical style of writing, and you have another set of people wanting a change. Okay, so when this Lyrical Ballads was published, Wordsworth himself says in the preface to the Lyrical Ballads that his poem, that is the Lyrical Ballads, which was published in 1798, was well received by some or half of the population, and the other half of the population criticized, of course, this sort of poetry, because they did not want to accept any change in or change from the neoclassical way of writing. But the other half of the population really wanted a change, or badly wanted a change. So we can see this as a revolt. Against the neoclassical style of writing. And not just that, the publication, the Lyrical Ballads, 1798 published Lyrical Ballads are romanticism period of romanticism kick-started with the publication of Lyrical Ballads in 1798. And he wrote the preface in 1800 because of the criticism that he got from various people. പലർക്കും അത് മനസ്സിലാവാത്തത് കൊണ്ടാണ് വേർഡ്സ്വർത്ത് അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ ഫിലോസഫി പറയാനായിട്ടും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മറ്റ് റീഡേഴ്സിന് മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ് അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ ഫിലോസഫി മനസ്സിലാക്കി കൊടുക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് എന്തിനു വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ് ഇത് എഴുതിയിട്ടുള്ളത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇത് ഇങ്ങനെ ഈ ഒരു സ്റ്റൈൽ ഓഫ് റൈറ്റിംഗ്, വൈ ഹി പിക്ഡ് സച്ച് എ സ്റ്റൈൽ ഓഫ് റൈറ്റിംഗ്, ഹി വാണ്ടഡ് ടു പ്രൂവ് his philosophy to the readers, and that is why he wrote the preface to the Lyrical Ballads. Okay, so the purpose, let's begin an analytical summary of the preface. In the preface begins, preface which was written in 1800 begins by stating that the purpose of Lyrical Ballads, which was published in 1798, was to ascertain whether poems written in the language of conversation of common people would impart pleasure to the readers. So that was the main thing, or the main reason as to why he published the Lyrical Ballads in 1798. The earlier diction that was used in poetry, the neoclassical writers, which was not intelligible to the common class, which was read only by the literate people and the rich or the aristocratic people, or the literate and educated people, and not open to the common people. This was what Wordsworth was revolting at. So Wordsworth says that poetry has a purpose. Poetry is not just meant for a set of people alone. It is meant for everyone. Poetry has a purpose. It is like religion. It is free for all, free to all, and it is molding the character of people. Okay, it has a definite purpose, and so it should be given to everyone. It's like air we breathe. It should be free to all. So it should not be meant for a set of people alone, and therefore the language that should be chosen must be that of a common man, ordinary language. Okay, all right. So anyway, the public response to these poems were mixed. Wordsworth, however, was very happy to learn that they had delighted a large number of people. Several of his friends advised him to preface so that others, the readers, will be able to understand this. Okay. So, we will stop here and we will take up the next section, that is the function of poetic pleasure, how he speaks about the superiority of poetry and arts, poetic diction and all in the next video. So, thank you and keep safe.